Hello, everyone. Mr. Lipchick here. Today we're going to talk about the Middle Ages, and by that I mean I'm going to give you a very broad overview of the Middle Ages, which is a considerable time period in European history, and there is a massive amount to know about it. You could study it for the remainder of your life and still not know a fraction of it. So, uh, you know, don't assume that this is going to cover every single facet, but it will cover the ones that are in your textbook and the ones that I think are most important. The time period called the Middle Ages is seen as the period separating uh, ancient times from the modern period. And that is pretty much how most historians have looked at it. It is sometimes broken down into three parts: the early Middle Ages from 400 to 1000 CE, High Middle Ages from 1000 to 1300 CE, and the Late Middle Ages from 1300 to 1500 CE. And it's important to note that these periods aren't precise. There are many variations about when one particular period begins and ends, and it's not that important. Usually, we're talking 50 to 100 years, which in when you look at how big this time period is, it's really not as significant. People tend to emphasize different things when it comes to defining a time period according to where it fits into this scheme. The term Middle Ages was used to describe this time period because many early historians thought that it was an insignificant period compared with the accomplishments of people who were thinkers in the ancient world and the thinkers of the Renaissance and the modern intellectuals. Yeah, this is not true, however. You have to keep in mind that while changes occurred very slowly during the Middle Ages in comparison with ancient and modern Europe, the changes did occur in all areas of life. And the Middle Ages was dominated intellectually by theologians, and theologians of all stripes usually do not want to challenge the established explanations for natural phenomena, and this is especially true of the Middle Ages. And also, there were disruptive forces during this time period, such as barbarian invasions and the plague, and these also led to a slower pace of change. The start of the Middle Ages is dated by some historians to the fall of the Roman Empire, which was 476 CE. And there have been many theories about why the empire fell. One holds that the corruption and instability of the Roman government led to its collapse. And this is entirely possible. The emperors were constantly replaced by commanders of different legions who wanted to be emperors themselves, so they would rally their troops after a victory and march on Rome and replace that person. At one point, they were being replaced about every 2 years. You would have a new emperor. You cannot have a stable government under a system like that. The emperors lived in excessive luxury, and many people began to lose respect for them. Also, during the civil wars in Rome, many emperors were assassinated, and this just led to a continuing chaotic situation in the empire. Also, it's believed by some that less food was available as Rome became more urbanized. The emperors, to keep the loyalty of the people, would have these games. They would have entertainments for the people, and people more and more began living in the city. They would get free grain, they would get entertainment, and fewer and fewer people, it's been seen through archaeological evidence, were farming and growing food. Also, the legions, as population declined, were continually staffed by non-Roman peoples. That is, Vandals and Goths and people of different barbaric backgrounds who were not as, let's say, steadfastly loyal to the Roman Republic as were the indigenous Romans. Christianity, it's thought, also changed Roman morality, lowering the population of the people, and increasing barbarian invasions from the east, it's thought, destabilized the empire. Keep in mind that when we use the term barbarian, we're not talking about necessarily somebody with a club or a spear. We're talking about people who were probably already Christianized, many of whom worked in metals, and many of them spoke Latin. They had a close interaction with Rome, but they were coming in increasing numbers and pretty much overwhelming the empire. The empire had been a force for stability and advancement in Europe, however cruel it could be at times. They would slaughter entire villages and do things like that, but they also had their thinkers and their inventors and so forth, their builders. And its decline and fall created a political and economic void in Europe. And then anytime you have a void, you're going to have problems. You're going to have people seeking to fill the void. And if people don't fill that power vacuum, you can wind up with a chaotic situation, which is what happened in Rome. As more and more barbarian groups, such as the Goths and Vandals, overwhelmed the empire, things began to descend into chaos and disorder, disunity, and Rome basically declined. The empire would eventually become divided and at one point cease to exist. Roads fell into disrepair, and commerce decreased dramatically. And commerce is very important. Trade between different parts of Europe and trade between different peoples and towns is significant in that ideas are often spread that way. And you also have to have a unified currency and a more unified lawful society for that to take place on a significant level. So what replaced the Roman Empire? A system where things were very self-contained and localistic replaced a very international society. Okay, what you see in that picture is an example of a castle with a moat. And for most of the early and high Middle Ages, there would be a feudal system which would govern the lives of most people. Basically, feudalism stood for a very self-sufficient, self-contained, small population of people living in a very structured environment. And it would be based upon a social hierarchy where people had mutual obligations to each other. In other words, it's something called reciprocity. I will do this for you, and in return, you will do this for me. Now, this didn't, mean that the people were equal or had equality. It simply meant that they relied upon one another. From most to least powerful, it included monarchs, that would be the kings and queens of noble ancestry, nobility, who were the lords and ladies and church officials, and they would be subservient to the monarchs, knights, who were lower nobility or lesser nobility. They would be vassals. In other words, they would be connected to the nobles through a vassalage. In other words, they would hold a piece of land in exchange for their loyalty to that particular noble or even the king. And they were also the horsemen. The horsemen, for much of this period, were the way that battles were settled. And to have a horse, you had to be wealthy, and you pretty much had to be a noble to get a horse. And below the knights, you had the peasants and serfs who worked the soil. They grew the food that made this system, this agricultural society, work. The monarchs were initially chosen by their fellow nobles in the earliest times. This kind of grows out of the Germanic barbarian tradition, many of the Germanic tribes that settled Europe after the Roman Empire. And this gave way to hereditary monarchies as it was a more peaceful way of transferring power. Some of the monarchs would eventually claim divine right of kings, that is, having been ordained by God to rule. And the kings controlled the land and the wealth of the kingdom and would award it to the lords for their services. And the land that they would award to them would be called a fief or a fiefdom. And the relationship between the lord and the king was a vassalage. So, in other words, the lord would be a vassal to the king, just as the knight would be a vassal to the lord. And the kings would rely on the nobility to provide food, money, and armies in times of war. The nobility awarded land from their fiefs to the knights, who would be vassals to their lords, and the knights in return provided protection and military service. The knights allowed the lowest members of the hierarchy, who were the serfs and the peasants, to work the land. The knights would protect them and provide them with food. The serfs were people who worked the land, but they could not leave the land. They weren't slaves, they couldn't be sold apart from the land, but they were the lowest order of medieval society. And peasants rented small pieces of land from noblemen, and they were otherwise free. They could come and go as they pleased. Europe appeared to be on the verge of uniting once again under the reign of Charlemagne during the Middle Ages, also known as Charles the Great. He was a Frankish king, the Franks being a Germanic tribe that entered Europe as the Roman Empire fell. And the Franks converted to Christianity during the late 5th and early 6th centuries. Charlemagne was at war with another Germanic tribe known as the Saxons throughout his reign. And also, he battled the Moors, who were Muslims in Spain, and many different Slavic peoples. Slavic meaning the ancestors of modern day, let's say, Polish people, Russians, Czechs, Slovaks, etc. At the height of its power, the Carolingian Empire, which is how Charlemagne's empire was known, covered most of Western Europe. So it looked as though they could possibly unite under Charlemagne. Charlemagne would forcibly Christianize pagan peoples that he conquered, particularly the Saxons. He would give them the choice to convert or be beheaded. And his conquests spread Christianity to many remote parts of Europe, making it the dominant religion. And his status in Europe through the church increased as a result of some turmoil which was occurring in Rome around the office of the papacy. In 799, Pope Leo III was forced from Rome by the family of Adrian I, who wanted someone from the nobility to hold the office of Pope. Now, this was not, legally required, okay, but Leo was not from the nobility, and they wanted somebody who was loyal to their set of people. Leo was forced out of Rome, and Charlemagne rescued him. Okay, Charlemagne's men rescued him from an attack by armed men, gave him shelter. And in return, Charlemagne in 800 was crowned by the Pope as the Holy Roman Emperor. Okay, Charlemagne escorted the Pope back to Rome, exiled the attackers, And Leo III saw the wisdom in making Charlemagne his ally. This was not just a religious thing. It was kind of a common sense move, whereby he would have somebody loyal to the church who would help him accomplish his goals. The title of Holy Roman Emperor established Charlemagne as the protector of the church and Christianity. And Charlemagne would continue his efforts to unify and Christianize Europe under this title. Charlemagne, as many people of the Middle Ages was barely literate and only learned to read and write as an adult. But nevertheless, he had a respect for education and understood its importance and became an advocate of educating the people of his empire. He required bishops within the empire to educate boys in reading, writing, theology, and grammar. And the church would have the predominant role in education throughout most of the Middle Ages. Charlemagne's death, however, brought about an end to the Carolingian Empire. He was succeeded by his son, Louis the Pious. And on his death, his sons fought a 3-year civil war to win control of the empire. This, combined with Viking raids from the north, led to the empire being divided between the sons, really bringing about an end to this effort at unity. And Europe was once again moved into a period of disorder. The title of Holy Roman Emperor, however, would be revived and live on, but it would take place through different European dynasties. But the idea was similar. It symbolized the continuation of the Western Roman Empire under the guidance and leadership of the Church. At its greatest extent, the Holy Roman Empire was a loose confederation of states, basically covering Germany, Central Europe, and northern Italy, as you can see in the map. The Holy Roman Emperor would be elected by the kings of the most powerful states in Europe, who were known as electors, or states in the empire, that is. There were 7 electors, and to be an elector was became a very important office for a time. And the emperors, however, had very limited power over the member states, and there were over 300 of them. So there were many small states. The Holy Roman Emperor would try to assert more and more control over them over the years, but this would ultimately be unsuccessful. So the Holy Roman Empire itself never emerged as a nation state. And the relative freedom of the member states contributed to the Protestant Reformation and other important European developments, intellectual freedom and things like that, because they were not under as tight a control of the Holy Roman Emperor, or there wasn't a direct line of control that you might think there would be. The late Middle Ages saw a decline in the power and relevance of the Holy Roman Empire as a modern nation-state emerged, which a nation-state is, states made up primarily of people of the same ethnicity, people speaking the same language, same nationality. So as the modern nation-states emerged, the emperor had less and less power. And this was accelerated by the Protestant Reformation in Germany, where the different rulers of these states declared independence in terms of religion and weakened the office even further. And eventually Napoleon reorganized Germany, making the office essentially disappear. And it would be officially eliminated in 1806 and would simply be an honorific title held by the Habsburgs, who were the noble ruling family of Austria. Brief summary. The Middle Ages are the time periods occurring between the ancient times and modern time periods. It began in the disorder created by the fall of Rome and was characterized by a decline in trade, self sufficient communities based on reciprocity and domination of the church. An attempt was made to unify Europe under the rule of Charlemagne, which failed but succeeded in spreading Christianity into the remote regions of Europe. The office given to Charlemagne, Holy Roman Emperor, would symbolize a unified Christian Europe. Unification under the Holy Roman Empire, however, would be permanently prevented by the rise of nation states towards the end of the Middle Ages. Once again, thanks a lot for attending, and I hope to talk to you soon. Have a great day.